It's this window with Facebook. That it's like some text and then it's like a dark blue button go live.
Yeah, in case it's not working.
And then fine.
Wait, I'm just gonna try one more time.
If not working, don't bother.
Oh yeah, I'll just wait for a second. Mention time that as well. All right.
Did it work or not?
No.
Then we don't bother.
Western liberal democracies, we don't have separate legal systems for different religious groups. We don't have different public services for different religious groups. We think it's absurd that we still have faith-based education where people can simply opt out of the education that we think that all people in a Western liberal democracy deserve to have access to. Firstly, I just want to quickly preempt something the opposition might say. Obviously, as a government, we're not trying to destroy religion or religious communities. I think that in the context of Western liberal democracies, it's likely that there is stuff like anti-discrimination protections in place for religious minorities, if you're concerned about those groups in mainstream schools. So, for example, for Sikhs in the United Kingdom, even in public secular education, there are protections in place and measures in place to stop discrimination from happening against those groups. So we don't think that is likely to be a big harm in this debate. Two arguments then from the Prime Minister. Firstly, why this increases agency for those religious communities, and secondly, why this decreases bigotry. Firstly, on why this increases agency. And the thesis of this argument is essentially that secular education increases the amount of options available to children, whereas religious education constrains those options. Comparative here is on the curriculum that is taught. That is to say that, of course, in religious education, there is some secular education, there is some stuff that is being taught in line with national education standards, but obviously the comparative is that in secular education, 100% of it is stuff that is being taught in line with state standards. Firstly, I'm going to prove why that religious education has incentives to be particularly restrictive in terms of things it teaches. That is to say, it is incentives to close off other ideas that might come into conflict with those religious norms. Firstly, because religious education and the churches and religious bodies that typically fund and give power to these educational bodies want to retain followers and perpetuate control over their community. That is to say, they want to instill fear in the children that if they go against the teachings of the community, they will go to hell. They want to instill in that community the ideas that mainstream science and things like evolution are wrong and that some people are out to get them in order to keep them loyal to that community. But secondly, because there are just a lot of ideas that are inherent in many religious doctrines that are antithetical to an opening up of options. That is to say that if you go to a particularly religious school that is anti-science, that has a religious doctrine that is inherently opposed to certain scientific ideas, that it is impossible to reconcile those two unless you're fucking Spinoza or something and you do some mental gymnastics to try and make those things reconcilable. So, what is the delta here? Obviously, you are still part of a religious family. Oftentimes, you will still go to church and still go to Sunday school. But firstly, this is a matter of extent. If it is a case that you're no longer spending 24 hours in a religious context, but only some of, or maybe a weekend in a religious context, but 5 of those days in a week, you are being exposed to new ideas. You are being challenged and having your ideas critiqued. Then, on the comparative, you're more likely to be exposed to new ideas on the outside. But secondly, it is just important that there is a unique availability of countervailing information. That is to say that you think it is valuable in itself to be able to be exposed, at least in some areas of your life, to ideas that might come into conflict with your pre-existing ideas that chip away at your kind of theoretical assumptions and things like that. That ability of countervailing information that otherwise would not exist is extraordinarily important. What is the impact of this? Firstly, choice maximizes utility. That is to say that when you have more autonomy and more exposure to new information, you are able to maximize utility. And this isn't just the option of leaving or challenging the community, although that is extraordinarily important. That is to say, if you are from a religious community, but you come into contact with ideas that challenge those ideas, it means you are more likely to actually have the autonomy to leave that religion. But it's also just exposure to other things is a good idea in general. It means that you are more likely to pursue a career that you're genuinely interested in. You're more likely to join new societies and new communities that you might not have had exposure to before. But secondly, on a principled level, we believe that in a Western liberal democracy, we should try to minimize the amount of inequalities that are generated by luck. That is to say, the quality of education you get, your ability to be exposed to new information, should not be predetermined by the community in which you are born, in the geographical region or the town in which you happen to be born. You should have the same quality of education and the same exposure to new ideas as everyone else living in that society, as is your right as a citizen. The weighing of this on the government bench is essentially that many other bad things about religious education can be remedied to a certain extent. That's fully what opposition are going to talk about. But there's stuff that I've talked about, that is to say, the inherent ideas in religious curricula that are antithetical to other ideas and are particularly restrictive, but because they have incentives to be so, are things that you cannot fix. But secondly, this impacts everything about the lives of students. It impacts the ways in which they see the world. It impacts their ability to break out of their communities and meet people from different walks of life and actually be the masters of their own destiny. That is extraordinarily important in this debate. Closing, do you have anything? Yeah, opening.
Go home and tell your parents they're gods that actually create the world. Will they just say, yes, Dan, you're correct, your teacher is actually correct?
Firstly, I think that if you're talking about religious nut jobs, that is probably symmetric on both sides of the house. There is a large swathe of people in the middle who are typically kind of moderate and will be in have this kind of discourse. Secondly, it is unclear why you even need, why you can't just bypass your parents. That is to say, if you go to a new secular school and you learn about new ideas that you otherwise wouldn't have, you don't necessarily report everything back to your parents. You just use that information yourself to go into society or to pursue a career going into the future without the constraint of your parents. But anyway. Also, if their impact is going to be your parents take you out of school, in most Western liberal democracies, you can't leave school before you're age 16. So anyway. Second argument, why bigotry decreases. This is essentially a contact theory argument, but I'm going to run it properly. The context of this argument is extraordinarily important. These are the most formative years in your life where your brain is malleable, where you're most likely to have your views on other people shifted. That is to say that maybe once you are older, your bigotry is going to be cemented. But when you're younger, you're far more likely to converse with other people, to try and empathize with other people, and make friends with new people. That is extraordinarily important in the instances where religions tend to be fairly insular and where you tend to have fairly bigoted views about other people. Firstly, you are unlikely to have significant amounts of contact with people from other religions. That is to say that if you're in an insular Catholic community and you go to a Catholic school, you are unlikely to meet students from other backgrounds. This breaks down those barriers insofar as you're more likely to meet people from other religious backgrounds in your new secular school. But secondly, you're more likely to come into contact with people from disadvantaged groups. You're more likely to talk to gay people. You're more likely to talk to trans people if you've been broken out of that insular Catholic community. You are actually likely to try and empathize with people who are different from you. People who, on the comparative, your religious leaders and your religious teachers have incentives to tell you that you should be afraid of and shun as people that are different from you. I think that is extraordinarily harmful, and actually breaking you out of the restrictive context is extraordinarily important.
Thank you very much to the Prime Minister. Very happy to go leader of the opposition to open the case on the up bench. You're here.
Yes, sir? Yes, sir?
Yes.
I need to be particularly clear. What this motion does is that states tell somebody the God to which you have dedicated your life, the God in whose name you have baptized your child into, you're not allowed to teach them about that. You're not allowed to take your child to an institution that serves and teaches them something something that is given by a God that you trust, that you have trusted your whole life, that you have built your whole life around. I think this is a principial break of somebody's agency, which we would not do for other kinds of beliefs. I think it is unjust that we do it for religious people. I also think that the alternatives for the actual people who follow these religious institutions would be worse. So I want to do some training here because there's none from OG. Where do these schools actually exist? Because further, I want to do a reality check. They usually don't exist in New York City or LA, where there are massive amounts of atheist people who wouldn't get their children into religious schools anyway, right? Or there are, but in very ethnically religious neighborhoods, such as Muslim neighborhoods or Catholic neighborhoods. A lot of these schools actually exist in areas with heavily religious communities, such as Alabama, Texas, or Catholic heavy areas in Italy, certain areas in Edinburgh. That is to say, these are areas where these children would be 90% surrounded by religious communities and by religious teachings anyway, when they go to church, with the children that they play with their neighborhood. So I don't see what the delta of OG is, because 90% of those communities are already people who are extremely religious. Second point of framing, what type of people actually access these schools, even if you don't buy my first framing? One, it is religious people who would otherwise pull their children out of school or ensure that they are heavily taught into their religious teachings in church on Sunday or at school or at home. Why is that true? And I want to do some characterization of these facts. One, they follow the rules of this religion, they have followed them throughout their lives. So the fact that their child follows them as well, the fact that their child prays at the correct time in the day, the fact that their child obeys by the laws of God is very important. Secondly, they want their children to be taught in these rules, because otherwise there's a threat of eternal damnation of your child sinning before marriage, or of you not fulfilling your duty as a parent to instill these values into your child, which means that you have a personal incentive as well as an emotional incentive, because you're not your child and you wholeheartedly believe this is the best way for him or her to live her life, to teach them these things, which means that if you ban these schools, they will heavily push for these values at home. They will heavily allow for the imams to take them to religious camps during the summer or to take them to religious camps on Sunday, because there is a direct threat to the way of life you consider you should instill in your child, so you'll not just let him be exposed to other things as OG. But the second point, non-religious people who live in those Catholic communities, for example, but are very poor and who wouldn't afford good education otherwise. See, for example, a lot of immigrant families in Alabama or in Texas. Why is this true? Because a lot of these schools have scholarships, which none of the other schools do. Why is that true? Because they're trying to do good by the word of God, because they want to do outreach to the community. They also have a lot of hot meals, for example, because they're connected to religious figures, they're also aware of the realities of that. What does this tell you? This is exclusive access that poor people will get, which is a net benefit. I am happy to undertake the fact that there may be abstinence until marriage if they get a good education, if they get into a better university that they have gotten otherwise. And two, the alternative for the people, the religious people, is actually being homeschooled or exposed to just as much religious teachings anyway. This is the first argument, which heavily mitigates OG. But the second argument is that they're better than alternatives, and that we can, and we do have a lot of regulation on this. Because I think OG is incredibly uncharitable to this, right? What are the actual fundamental differences? Yes, maybe the morality they teach is slightly different. Do abstinence until you get married. They teach creationism instead of evolutionism. Sometimes they have universe, but crucially, panel, they still have to pass the same exams at the end of their years. Two, they still abide by the broad curriculums that the state has to follow. It's not like UK Protestant schools could just take out biology or chemistry from their curricula, right? So they're reasonably regulated. But I'm going to give you 5 systemic reasons why that is true. One, they have educational boards and inspections that are obviously well done because they're heavily watched by non-religious people, and also because they're the center of culture wars currently. So they know that journalists have an incentive to look for irregularities, so they have all the more incentives to make teachers not be abusive, not be highly ideologicalized, because they know they're watched out, which means that the board, the educational boards, want to make teachers behave okay and abide by good educational standards. Second reason here, they are supervised by religious leaders who want to make their investment not be cancelled by the government because they're indoctrinating the children, which means that there's also incentive from the leaders, religious leaders, to make teachers behave correctly. The third reason is that people who are alumni obviously want to legitimize their educational background, which means that they will make sure these don't go rogue and don't radicalize children and get a bad name as Islamic schools. Yes, OG. Oh, no, actually, CG, they have something, it's not OG.
Okay, so your difference is that in religious communities that are very religious, they get more religious and try to impose more religion. Our difference is more unique insofar as at least now you have some countervailing information and some countervailing education.
It doesn't matter you have countervailing education or principle, because your parent will go tell you at home, no, God created the world. You will trust your parent more than you will trust your teacher anyway, because they take care of you, because they love you, because they're the ones that have been there since the beginning of your life. So I don't care if your teacher tells you evolutionism, you will trust your parent anyway. Sport mechanism why these are well regulated. Given the info slide, they have some public funding, which means that the states are directly reliant, they are directly responsible, and they don't want to appear like they lost control over the religious schools. So they will also supervise and ensure that broad strokes of education are done correct. What are the impacts? The worst excesses that government will try to claim do not happen and are heavily mitigated by the fact that they're educational institutions. Secondly, there's more checks and balances than if they were at home, because there are more teachers, there are more students, which means that there's increased chances of irregularities coming out. And fourthly, I think this means that we have increased accessibility for poor people in those communities. I do not care if they have sex later on in their lives.
Thank you very much to leader of the opposition. Very happy to call Deputy Prime Minister.
First, pushing back on their characterization, then on new beliefs to encounter, and then on regulation. Because firstly, on framing, I think Ana just tells you an extremely afactual picture of the world by telling you that religious communities only really exist in cities like Alabama or states that are really religious anyway. Because if you just lived in any major city in your life, you know that there are often large religious enclaves in them anyway. For example, in cities like Sydney, which have like large Arab and Jewish like migrating populations, so often entire suburbs have a lot of these people in it, which then have religious schools built around these communities. So I just don't think it is true, because like people migrate to various areas, to various cities anyway. But secondly of all, even if what Ana tells you is largely true to an extent, there's obviously a scale of how religious people are. People in Alabama, there's a subset of them that are obviously going to be far more religious than most, but there's also probably people in Alabama who are just culturally Christian. If you're someone who's getting sent to a religious school in Alabama, you're far more likely to be just with people who are also at the same amount of religiousness as you, rather than people who are maybe just their parents are Catholic and they're kind of not religious people. So I just don't think that her claiming that we don't get much change in meeting new people is actually true. Secondly, then on religious people, teaching their children religious beliefs anyway. The first thing Ana tells you is that people are likely to feel very threatened by this, so it means they're more likely to pull their child out of school or be more controlling. Firstly, I think people, religious communities and religious parents who are at this level of controlling are likely to want to pull their child out of school anyway, because if you're so concerned about the fact that your child is not getting taught things in your proper religion, things like homeschooling are probably something that you're going to try and do anyway. But secondly, I actually think the lack of religious schools provides an impetus for governments to be far more strict about regulating things like homeschooling and being more proper about the things people are teaching in these schools, because it likely shows that these people are people who are from religious schools. So I actually think that the amount of people, thirdly also, in most countries, this is often really hard to do or really illegal. A lot of people just don't have the time or money to homeschool their children at all. Some countries don't even have the level of great homeschooling regulation. So I think the amount of change on this is very small. I don't think that many people are actually going to get pulled out of school. The second thing Ana then tells you is that even if you are in a school which is really secular and you're meeting a lot of people and they're teaching you new ideas, it means that your parents are likely to send you to more things like summer camps for your religion, or at home are going to tell you that the things you're taught is true. Firstly, I think honestly, this is fine if they want to send you to Sunday school. Like if your parents are super religious and they want you to have a religious upbringing, that's totally okay for them to do in their spare time. What we tell you at Aidan, that the difference that we are able to get is you are not exposed to religion 24/7. This is not the only idea that you actually are exposed to. It is totally fine on our world if at Sunday you are taught religious teachings, but you're at least given the option of being able to be exposed to other ideas at your school. So we think this is a totally fine thing. But secondly of all, with trusting your parents and just believing them, I think it's ridiculous to act like you can't bypass your parent beliefs. People lie to their parents all the time or hide things from them. If someone is necessarily struggling with their religion and feels like they can't tell their parents about it, I think it is unlikely these children are going to feel any less unsafe. But thirdly, even if these children do not believe what their school is telling them and come home and tell that, and their parents are able to reconvince them about God, evolution not being real, we still think it is still important and still a benefit that we give you that this option exists in the first place. Because in open opposition world, this option doesn't exist at all. This is the only view that they're ever exposed to, and there is absolutely no change. Third thing they tell you is rich religious schools will give out scholarships. I just do not understand this. State schools exist. The government can set up selective schools and more scholarships to other schools. There's a huge incentive for other private schools who are also similarly rich to do this. So I just don't think there's any benefit. So at the end of this, it is totally unclear to me how many people are getting pulled out of school. I don't think people are becoming any less religious. Even if you believe we're only able to get a slight change, it's far better than a world that opening opposition gives you, where there's totally no option closing.
But I think as Spike said, they are taught common curriculum as well. They are not taught religion 24/7. They have everything else, but also religion.
Okay, on to regulation and the curriculum. First thing I would tell you is that the curriculum is largely to be the same. First thing, I think, and this is still going to be checked. First thing, I think the mechanism she gives you about these people having a large incentive to check these well is wrong. Because oftentimes governments have a huge interest in making sure these religious groups are actually going to vote for them. In America, Christian evangelicals are a huge voting bloc of the Republican Party. Even in countries like Australia, in religious schools in Australia, you are allowed to fire teachers if they're gay, and the Liberal government that was in power for 10 years had a massive incentive in keeping those anti-discrimination laws going because religious people in Australia are such a large voting bloc. These are really important for government to arrange. Secondly of all, on national curriculum being the same. Firstly, national curriculums are often set at a really low level because it has to set a baseline for what everyone is being taught. So yes, these people are probably still learning things like how to do maths and how to analyze text. But the things they probably are not learning are things like a religion that are just conveniently left out, like evolution. But even if you believe that they are taught exactly the same things, there's still options that are often not allowed. Firstly, because things like school counselors, etc., because of the norms religions often set up for things like women in their community, often don't just allow teach you about other options. For example, a woman in Catholic school maybe isn't taught about how to get into this very prestigious university or apply to law school because this is just not a norm for women in her community to do. So this is just not an idea that she's exposed to while she's in school that's something that she could achieve. Secondly, the sort of teachers that these religious schools hire are often just kind of weird religious nutjobs half of the time, or the principals, because the people who want to work at these schools have an incentive to keep their religion going. So oftentimes these schools are maximally conservative as possible, so oftentimes these options are just not even shown. So even if everything is being taught the same, and we've shown you already Aidan being taught poorly, there are options that are just not taught to you or shown to you that you can achieve when you graduate school, that these people are likely to get at a secular school focused on education. Further on things people who are alumni want to legitimize, as I already explained, oftentimes if you go to diploma, surely your school's legitimized. But secondly of all, oftentimes the people who are interested in legitimizing the school, often prestigious selective school private schools and going. Okay. Anyway, I think regulation gets much worse and life gets much worse for these kids.
Thank you very much for that speech, and happy to call the last top speaker, DLO.
Can I start? This might come as a shock for the opening government of this round, but there are religious people that are gay, that are queer. There are religious people that are tolerant. There are religious people that are welcoming, and there are religious people that are not bigoted. We do not understand this very narrow portrayal in which they're depicting these people as being evil and being an outcast of the society. We think this completely unfair, and most of the important part, I think religious people have agency and have capacity to choose, right? There are many things that are influencing us. Religion is just one of them, but it's part of the identity of the people. Do not let them get away with this portrayal. Let's engage with what they have told us today. I think this whole part about how you're increasing the agency by basically offering a lot of alternative information. I think we live in an era where we are exposed to a lot of information, and it didn't actually change a lot of opinions. If you look at any internet and any TikTok, it actually works the other way around. It actually creates more sedimented ideas in your mind. But on this motion specifically, I think this exposure to multiple information, exactly as Ana Coman will be served, precisely as will be seen as an attack to those for these religious people to actually push back the narrative. The DPM just explained to you how there are a lot of Christian people in so many areas, and there are a lot of voters. How they will react by taking the schools away from them. I think the backlash will actually be significant. If you look at any reality check, if you look at Western democracies, whatever, right now, you are actually see an increasing trend of conservatism. You're actually seeing a lot of people that are more right-leaning and are actually going further to actually expose those beliefs, right? And they're going and pushing for those Christian values. Look at the changing of Roe v. Wade in US. Look at increasing voting for Le Pen and so on and so forth. This is a major block that you are alienating, and these people will take it very personally because the government, no, thank you, is actually going against them. There will be repercussions, even if you're because now let's take this on the case. Right, if you remove this, if you remove the chance of them being homeschooled because they're not as wealthy, which we think that's not necessarily true, but there will still be an enough block that if it goes to the public school, those parents will put pressure on the actual school board to push for the religious value that they already have, right? Because these kids that were put in the religious schools, now they have to go and fill those places. That means that there are the same parents that were so indoctrinating that we have to take the kids away from them, right? We are creating a situation in which we just put a lot of pressure on the new schools to do the same thing.
Point.
No, thank you. I think when it comes to if we're weighing this uncertainty, there is less evidence to uphold this idea that these kids will change their opinion, right? Because this is the whole point on the government side. We're exposing them to new ideas. That means that you will have new kids that are not indoctrinated. I don't think it necessarily works like that. People can be convinced of things in various moments in their life. Or we have already explained how the communities are very strong, but what you are actually certain on our side is the fact that there is a net benefit for some communities that are poor and do not have other access to education that now are able to access it specifically because of the religious schools. That is something that they haven't tackled with, and that is something that is unchangeable regardless, because schools are expensive, because there are less opportunity when it comes to, I don't know, school supplies, which are quite expensive, right? And food and so on and so forth. Those are that category of people is a vulnerable category that they are not accounting for, and it is quite crucial. I'm going to take a POI from closing if they have any. opening them?
So obviously not all religious people are bigoted, maybe there will be some backlash, etc. We can believe all of this mitigation is true. Our very simple claim was just that on the comparative, you are more likely to be taught in school a book about a queer couple or exposed to new scientific ideas. That is the marginal change on opening government.
But on this, even the best case scenario, if you have this possible marginal change, it is still very uncertain, right? You have certain controls for which you can actually account for those kids to actually be taught good lessons, right? You have exams, you have board control, you have all of these that are actually contributing to make sure that you're gonna be taught well. And when it comes to specific exposure to queer couples in books, I think that also is as unlikely to happen in a normal in a public school as well, because there is the we do not want to go against the wave, precisely because there will be backlash outside, and parents will come back afterwards. On this principial thing about what parents should be doing with their kids, I think it's important to realize that we leave a lot of room for parents to decide what to do with their kids. We leave them to, we give them the possibility to have beauty pageants for their kids. We leave them the possibility to have them hire child actors, which are both questionable things to do with your kids. We give them the options to monetize their kids on TikTok because it's fun nowadays, but they also think this is in the best of child or in the best interest of their child. I think it comes down to the parents think they have the best interest. The government asks them to do so, and along the lines they're doing regulation in order to make sure that they're not messing things up. At the end of the day, what the government is suggesting is going against everything just for a marginal possibility that you have two kids that are changing their opinion at the cost of poor people that are no longer having the same access to the quality of their education, at the cost of angering parents and alienating communities of minority religions, or just like the entire increasing wave of Christian people that are in the West. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. Very happy to call member of the government to open the case for closing government. Here.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I think we've heard a lot about like how like people might change their minds, people might like we've had a lot of impacts that are great. But I think the crux of this issue isn't about whether like minority religions are like going to not allow their not be allowed to like celebrate their religion, or like whether people will change their minds. I think the crux of the issue is the culture in schools, mainly because I think we can probably agree that on both sides it's likely that we have similar impacts, because people can go to Sunday school or religious school, or like people have the ability to change their mind either way. So I think the main issue is going to be the culture of the schools. So I think I'm going to characterize who goes to religious schools, and like generally people that go to religious schools are likely to be either people who are religious or people that live in the area and agree that these schools are generally like have good funding and are seen as good schools, so then therefore other people also go to these schools. Now this leaves like two very distinct demographics of people that go to schools, which are people that are religious and people that aren't religious. And I think in a religious setting, like when you have the emphasis on religion in a school, it's likely that like there's going to be more of a division between people that are religious and people that are non-religious within religious settings, rather than like people that are religious and people that are non-religious in non-religious settings. Mainly because you have like access to like different beliefs in a non-religious setting, and not right now. But in a non-religious like secular setting, you have access to like multitudes of different beliefs and religions, which means that people will generally accept that other people have different beliefs and allow this to occur. Whereas when you're in a religious setting, like at school, like I went to a religious school, and I think generally, like often non-religious like people are likely to get like treated differently by teachers, mainly because the teachers are likely to be from that religion, and therefore people that don't subscribe to those values are like, although they will be treated like similarly, it's likely that teachers may have implicit biases against them, even if it's not like explicit. It could be like a minor bias that occurs. Whereas like also like characterizing children generally see differences in people and are likely to like jump on that, because like generally children are likely to like dislike other people for differences, mainly because they've heard stuff that their parents say or like stuff that other people say, and they're just likely to repeat it. And therefore I think in religious schools it's likely that like children are going to like have issues of bullying on regards of like differences in religion, mainly like so non-religious students who like, if you're in a religious school and there's a lot of non-religious students in this school and you've brought a massive highlighted like issue of like religion in this school, it means that there's likely to be like cliques, which means that you're less likely to like integrate people that are religious and non-religious in society. Whereas in like a normal school where there's like less likelihood of like being impact, like there's less likelihood of the religion being like a major issue. It's more like people can practice their religion, not right now, thank you, but people can practice their religion within like the school, and it's likely that like people still have the ability to like actualize and have religion. So I think the main impacts of this is that like children will have a better culture in schools, because I think it's still likely that people are taught ethics and morals like in any school. There's a curriculum in any school. So I think the main thing is that given there will be a less of a highlight to religion, it means that like generally anyone can like access their own religion and anyone can like do whatever they want with regards to religion, and people will still like have that access because like people will still go to Sunday school and stuff like that. So I think it's likely that generally there will be a better culture and it will be like less cliques and less like issues within the school. Yes.
As Western liberal democracy, would you also ban French school in the UK or Japanese school in the US?
What, sorry?
As Western liberal democracy, would you also ban French school in the UK and Japanese school in the US?
Well, I don't think it's particularly to do with like nationality, it's just to do with religion. Like it's not about where you come from, it's about what religious belief you are, and it's about like inflicting like those specific values to like everyone in the school. Like I think the values can generally be seen as good, but I think like generally when you like enforce it, like some people are likely to rebel. Yeah.
So if the issue is the dynamics, then moving religious children to usual schools will mean the religious people are a minority and thus discriminated. You just reverse the balance. I'm unclear.
Thank you. So I think it's likely that when you like put religious like children, because obviously some religious children are going to go to non-religious schools anyway. So I think it would improve life for them firstly, because like they would have more religious school like children in those schools and they would be more integrated into the society. And also when you like shift it, it just means there's more of a balance of people that are religious and non-religious in all schools, which generally means that there's going to be less aversion in society to religion or aversion to like secularism. I think it just basically means that it's more likely that people are going to work together despite their differences in religion, and therefore it's going to be a like inherent benefit because everyone can work together with less discrimination on religion and less emphasis on it. Because although religion is your personal beliefs, and that's great, I think it's more important that people focus on like society as a whole and how we interact with each other and general morals, rather than specifically, this is like my religion and everyone needs to follow this, which I think in a lot of religious settings can be like this case that's enforced on people. So I think like generally it's better for like the children, especially as like, so I understand that there can be like gay people who are religious, but I think like there is an inherent like stakeholder of people that are religious from minority like sexualities and other like groups. And I think it benefits like people who are a part of these groups, mainly because when you are exposed to like other things, you can self-actualize and you're not inherently being told by literally everyone that like it is inherently bad for you to be yourself. And when you're told this in like some religious settings, not all, but some religious schools like explicitly state that it's not okay to like be gay or something like that. And so I think when you don't inherently like only have access to like this beliefs, it's likely that like people don't then have to deal with like internalized homophobia and internalized trauma, because they have like inherently been told and are telling themselves due to their own beliefs that they can't be themselves. And this means that it's going to likely benefit people because they're likely to then be exposed to these other views and say, okay, well, I believe this and I can have access to these religious beliefs without having a crisis of identity because I can access both and that's okay. And I think generally this just means that it's an inherent benefit for like minority like sexualities within religion and like religious people in general being integrated into society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, member of the government. We're happy to call member of the opposition to open the case for closing opposition.
Yeah, we believe that faith-based schools provide for much better integration and socialization for people who come from religious families, and we also believe that these schools provide like much greater choice and agency for people to decide what they want to do in life, rather than if you don't allow people to and kids to exercise their religion within school. Like, let me first do some characterization of the debate because I think this is important. We are talking about Western liberal democracies, which is like very likely those parents of those kids who we are talking about, they are not some like zealots or radicals. They already live in a Western country. They already like probably themselves have a conflict between values which they find themselves in and those religious like origins they come from. That is why like it's probably not very likely scenarios they will take kids out of school. But we need to ask a question here: in which scenario those kids and those families as a whole are more likely to integrate into that society and become members of that society and like take jobs, get well-paid jobs, become successful within that society? And we say that it's when you allow kids to socialize and become members of the society and don't expel this. I think the point which closing government raised about culture is very important here. Exactly, we create such a culture in school that those kids feel comfortable to study and they don't feel oppressed in school on an everyday basis. So let's talk about like first OG. Like this, they told us basically we provide more choice like when kids are exposed to other information. No, we provide no choice because, as we said, we still teach general curriculum. In a lesson of biology, you will not say this is everything evolution. Like, don't believe anything of that. You will have to take an exam, and if you write in your exam that everything happened because of like God, you will fail that exam. Leaders of those schools, teachers of those schools, they will be interested to teach you the best information because they will be interested to promote their religion. If people of your religion become members of your society, like doctors, like lawyers, this will make the school more popular, and that's why. Like if everyone fails the exams after like 10 years of school, then no one will go to the school anymore, and popularity of religion will decrease. That's why we say that those leaders still want to teach all those subjects. What is the difference here? The difference here is we have like additional classes. Like when you talk about culture of religion, when you talk about history, probably yes, some religious like tenets as well. But the thing is like curriculum stays the same. Like, but you are given additional choice to study in a more comfortable environment when you have access both to religion, but also you can study what's already like in the curriculum. What we also like, we concede one point here. Probably those schools will be less diverse in terms of like, you will probably not have minorities. People like teachers probably will not talk about LGBT rights or like everything like that. But we think that this is still this is probably a clash here. But we win this clash. Why? Because the alternative here is that those like religious kids go to another school, and then like in that other school they become minorities themselves and they become oppressed because they look different, they speak different, like they think differently, and that is the clash here. Like even if they are not exposed to all those like LGBT ideas that you can be like a minority and everything like within the school, we believe that they have other part of their life, as I said, because there is a conflict here. Like something they live in a Western liberal democracy, they're exposed to those ideas through the internet, they're exposed to those ideas through like society in general, and they go somewhere with friends, etc. But here we say that like within school, they must have a more comfortable and inclusive environment to feel like they belong there, so that they can study and then they and don't be oppressed on the basis of their religion. We also say that in general, LGBT, like if you think about our Western liberal democracies, they are much more accepting of LGBT rights at this point. So like you have LGBT pride parades and everything. This probably is a group, yes, still a minority on many aspects, but like society generally is very favorable towards those views. But everyone, like you never see like Muslim parades when people can just express their religion, or like Pakistani parades, because many people are still hostile towards them. We have accepted, we are inclusive enough to accept LGBT, but we are not inclusive enough to accept religion. That's why this discrimination in schools is much more perverse and much more strong. That's why we want to defend those kids by allowing them to study in a comfortable environment, please.
So you're right. Eventually these kids will grow up and have to work, live, and love alongside people from different backgrounds. That's why it's so important for them to meet a diverse range of people face to face while they are young and still impressionable.
Why can't they meet them outside school, like somewhere else? Yes, because you have two environments, like we create for them two realities which they can compare. You create for them one reality they have to conform to. They don't have a choice, because like I think the closing government said they can exercise religion outside school. But the thing is, for kids, school is like 100% of their life. This is why it's a social life. Like you go to school, you do your homework, you go to school, like you don't do anything else. That's why it's very important that those kids are like can exercise their identity like in those schools, because this is an important part of their like personal identity. Like when those kids go to school, they already have some religion, like teachings, like they already know something about religion and everything. They haven't internalized certain values which parents gave them. When they go to school, they feel this conflict of two realities, and then they may become hostile either to their parents because their parents are not liberal enough, or hostile to school because they think that school betrays their parents and it teaches them something parents didn't tell them. So you create this hostility and you exacerbate this conflict between Western liberal democracy they live in and religious identity which they have. Then they don't feel comfortable in the school. For instance, if I'm a Muslim boy in Birmingham and I go to like secular school, I need to, for instance, pray 5 times a day. But then if I do this, other kids will ridicule me, or I wear different clothes because I'm of a different religion and I'm a minority and I'm oppressed. I will not be like respected the same way as everyone else. What does it mean? It means that I feel much more inferior. It means my grades are likely to suffer because now I feel that I don't belong here. I will not become a doctor because I'm probably I study less hard, and this leads to radicalization, and in general, when people are bullied, they become more excluded. And this leads that second generation of immigrants are very hard to integrate exactly for this reason. They feel they don't belong here, but they also don't have a religion. That's why they lose their identity. They don't know where they belong, and that's why it's very hard for them to integrate society, become doctors, and that's why we are very proud of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. Very happy to call the government with here. Huh? Yes. You have 1 minute by Judge Manuel.
Also, if I don't want to be recorded, can I just sit here?
Ideally, speak from there, because then you can see POIs and we can also see you. We are not recording the round because the stream didn't work.
Okay.
So no one is recorded, so don't worry about that.
Right, so I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, so first, let's look at who the most important stakeholders in this debate are and why they care about them. Chef, in this debate, the most important stakeholders are religious kids in religious schools and non-religious kids in religious schools as well, the two biggest demographics and only demographics in religious schools. And why do we care about them? Because these are kids. They're going to take all their learning in high school or in primary school into society later on, and that have real life implications on how our society is run in the future. Now, our opponents, both sides, they tend to make very, very bold claims that is contingent on extremities, contingent of like, oh, schools will absolutely lie about scientific beliefs if it goes against their religion. It could be true, and then they also say that no, schools won't lie. They will stick to whatever national curriculum is out there. Again, could be true, but what has my partner done here? My partner has taken a very, very stripped down approach. What my partner has done is give you substantives that stand irrespective of how extreme the characters, the actors in this motion are, and are instead contingent on the very, very simple nature of kids, the school itself, and the parents of these kids. Now, before I move on to analyze why my partner's points are the best in this debate, I would like to rebut some point about the integration. The closing opposition talks a lot about how the government side is very negatively hampers integration, and their side somehow promotes it. But I fail to see it. I strongly believe that integration is much, much worse on their side, because by their own point, by their own characterization, people who value religion, people who are very religious, are much more likely to send their kids to religious schools, right? So what are they essentially doing by that? Taking these kids, taking these religious thoughts away from public forums like public schools or public high schools, and instead moving them into schools that are religious, right? Schools that prioritize religion, as the input slide says. So what is it doing? This is secluding religion into a very religion-only space, right? How is that integration? My partner, on the other hand, clearly talks about how if you're banning religious schools, all these in a Western liberal democracy, it is more often than not, it is legal that kids go to school, and if they're not, it is considered illegal that to not send your kids to school, right? So all these kids that are in religious schools now move to public schools. What is that doing? It is bringing this religion into these public forums, public schools. These public schools in a Western liberal democracy, they're not anti-religious, right? These schools, they just don't prioritize religion in their academic life or sports life or extracurricular life, unlike religious schools. And this major divide, this major characterization of what these two different types of schools prioritize actually brings us to the major clash, difference on this debate, the exclusivities of our points, right? So again, already integration is much, much better on our side, because now religion is on the public forum. In public schools, kids who are secular have more religious friends, right? They can talk about it. They're free to talk about it. Religion now is in a much more explicitly public space. Now, let's talk about these religious schools, right? Okay, I agree. These schools could have facilities, all kind of facilities that is there, right? And but the real question is, are these schools encouraging kids to use these? And if they do, are these kids even supported to do that? Because like I said, religion it goes beyond just education, right? Religion it also includes very heavily on how someone conducts themselves. So a religious school, a school that prioritizes religion, is much more likely to reward these kinds of behavior, right? And encourage those kinds of behavior. So even if these facilities, say sports or horse riding or whatever exists, if a religion is traditional, right? Traditionally, if a certain gender doesn't engage in sports, doesn't grow out their hair, or doesn't have very short hair or something, right? These could be okay there, which would allow them to bypass the regulations that are opening would be talked about. But as my partner talked about, the implicit biases that these schools could have, that the teachers and the people in power, the people of authority in these could have, will create like a reward system, whereas children who explicitly sort of have these characteristics are rewarded, even though they have these all kinds of facilities there, right? Sorry, no, thank you. So what this does is that it creates intense divide among students, religious kids who are like explicit religious or who confine with traditional religious values are more likely to be favored by their teachers. They are more likely to gain help from their teachers, right? Because again, that is what the school does. The school prioritizes religion, right? So they're going to hire people who also prioritize this value. So these kids are more likely to gain the favor of their teachers. What does that do? Non-religious kids or religious people who don't confine to these traditional external religious values are more likely to alienate him. We see that in everywhere, right? We can see that because when a student gains extra favor from their teacher, their fellow peers are more likely to, they're a suck up or something like that, and to alienate them. This negatively hampers the religious kid as well. They think that because they are confined to traditional religious values, they're being discriminated against. This simply would not exist on our side because in public schools that is not the priority. It doesn't matter in what way you conduct yourself as far as religion goes, right? So let's talk about non-religious kids or kids who don't externally confine to the traditional religious values, right? They're less likely to be favored by the teachers. So in that case, these kids are less likely to gain favors or extra help from their teachers simply because they do not confine to this. So basically, these points that my partner put forward rest on very, very basic nature of power dynamics in school. And because of these power imbalances, how it can create a lot of enmity or animosity between kids, right? To close up my partner's point is that we give a very strict version, something that's very likely to happen, why every demographic they're having an animosity against them, and why our side has better integration and the cases that's exclusive to our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, and very happy to call the opposition whip to sum up the debate as a whole. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to today's clashes, I want to give out several rebuttals. I think proposition never engaged in the worst case scenario on what happens if parents choose to homeschool their kids. OG told you that the government can just regulate homeschooling. No, you cannot. Western liberal democracy cannot helicopter over what you're doing at home in private space. Under our paradigm, though, schools can be directly regulated by government if there's abuse on certain kids because of their identity, because of their certain practice in public schools. Overall, it's easier to check and regulate in public space than in private. For instance, if the state thinks sex education must entail discourse on queer, they can make it mandatory in those schools. But under their paradigm, it's impossible. And then secondly, proposition did not engage in the point on academic excellence, on who gets better education. They only tell you that, okay, kids will have more choices, that's why they would be better. No, more often than not, kids with less choices do better at school than other kids. But jokes aside, I think that religious kids definitely get better schooling under our paradigm. OO told you that faith-based schools get more funding, but Daniel tell you that religious communities is more often than not the largest funnel for a charity donation. So facts that the biggest donation in the United States is charity based and they donate billions every year. More importantly, Daniel told you that kids will have better schooling under our paradigm because the reason why these religious people donate, the reason why these religious people set up the school, because they have a huge incentive to empower their community, to make their community look great in a society because they want to get integrate to it. That's why kids are more often than not getting better fundings and resources for schoolings and become better adults or whatever in future life. And thirdly, principally, they did not engage to my POI on why it is legitimate for Western liberal democracy to ban schooling for certain identity. They're not engaging on why we don't ban French school in the UK, even though they spend a lot of time on studying French, which is not necessarily necessarily better for a better use of time, if you just take A-level standard. But they're banning religious schools just because they think that it's not good. But principally, they did not even substantiate why religion in and of itself should be banned, right? So that's why I think they lack a principal argument there. clashes today, sorry, later. So CG, the first clash is, I think, which is the most important. CG talks about integration of the kids into the society later in life. On which side gives like kids better integration. I think firstly, it's a Western liberal democracy where more often than not, people are later on judged based on their merit, i.e. their academic excellence, because like they practice capitalism. And that's why like we have argued to you that kids tend to get better education in religious school because of more access to funding and so on and so forth. And for instance, like we don't like marginalize as adults a good doctor just because they're Muslim. We don't like marginalize a scientist just because they practice certain like religion. But we do judge people based on their, academic excellence, their, their knowledge, so on and so forth. So that's why we think that we actually integrate the kids better and make them better. And even more importantly, our team has told you that kids can grow up in a more supportive and comfortable culture in a faith-based schools because they have more confidence and their identity is more downplayed. They are surrounded by people who are like, so under their paradigm, kids are surrounded by people who are different from them. More often than not, they feel marginalized when they have to pray, when they have to like dress or diet in a certain manner. And in mixed school, your brain would just be occupied by such unnecessary stress by feeling like different. I think it's very important to highlight the difference between kids and adults and why it's very important for kids to, study in a comfortable environment. As an adult, we tend to be like more, people tend to be like more emotionally mature, responsible, or just occupied by other stuff like work and mortgage, and they tend not to like pay too much attention to things like how you dress, etc. And more importantly, they're more bounded by law. You cannot commit hate crimes or judge people on the street because otherwise you'll be fired. You will be like imprisoned. Hence, marginalization will unlikely happen in adult life. Because like for us, you're just a colleague regardless of your religion. However, kids in school are not bound by these laws or conduct because they have. And also they have like more time and less emotional maturity, so that they tend to be like insulted or marginalize their classmates. And consequently, it's very important that kids grow up in these like distorted environment. They tend to have less confidence. They tend to have more childhood trauma. Under our paradigm, kids feel like they're a normal human being. They don't have to worry about like how they dress, how they diet, and they just focus on academic excellence. I'll take OG.
So you say that kids will now become oppressed minorities. However, we provide the analysis that children aren't born bigoted, they become bigoted through a lack of exposure. And so under our side, other children in the same school are more likely to become accepting of religious minorities.
Kids in our school have the incentive to be less bigoted and more integrated to society because it's in their best interest to prepare their kids to be more successful in the society. Right. So, and then also, I think like the kids grew up in a mixed school tend to have less confidence when they have all these like insult or mental stress on themselves, and that's why it's less likely for them to get integrated into the society because all these people who don't practice religion would just be their childhood trauma. And how can you work in an environment and feeling self-conscious about your how you dress and how you diet, and I think it's just like not good for their mental health. It's not good for their mental health for the rest of their lives. And I do think that the proposition should take the burden of proof to tell us. I think it's important to highlight it in a Western liberal democracy, and hence that is why after these kids join the society, they're less likely to be attacked or marginalized or whatever. And I think like kids on our paradigm will have like better academic excellence. They will have like better mental health. And they will have more confidence, and hence I think the schools, which is very important in this debate, it's about schooling. The schools on our paradigm are much better than their paradigm.
Thank you very much to the opposition whip. Now very happy for you to shake your hands, leave the room. We'll deliberate. We'll call you back in 15 minutes. I'm quickly running to the bathroom. Take your minutes to okay for initial calls, and we'll start chatting. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just confirm that we are not streaming by any chance. But you know, that would be pretty. Dead. Yeah, it never. But I will.